appreciate you coming out tonight, and special thanks to Pyramind for hosting us. It's a real treat to be here. It's a treat to be anywhere. So tonight I'm going to give you a somewhat eclectic presentation which touches on the products that are soon to come out of KMI, the K-Mix. Also gets to some of the root technology that allow us to do products as we do. Reaches a little bit backwards and forwards in terms of my personal visions about 21st century music, and hopefully a vision that may be borne out where music goes. And we'll have some time for questions, and then very talented and wonderful Thavius Beck will come on and delight us with some great examples of how he uses the K-Mix in conjunction with his products. So I'm easily bored. I've been very lucky in that I've been able to make many different things in my days. From a guitar that I built in the upper left corner, the first violin synthesizer. This is all pre-MIDI. We were on the cover. I started Zeta Music, which is considered the first modern violin about 35 years ago. So I could actually buy a copy of Playboy for the articles. Next to Laurie Anderson, upper left. I hated loud commercials on TV, so I made what was essentially a multi-band dynamics processor like you would use for mastering. That was in that little silvery box that would, about 500,000 of them were sold through Radio Shack. Below that, a Volume Logic plugin for iTunes, conferencing, processors. Got about 16 patents. I did pickups for the Grateful Dead, guitar processing, the first cello and viola. The second cello was played by Yo-Yo Ma and is on display at MIT Media Lab. After MIDI came out, I really wanted a better interface for string instrument players, acoustic instrument players, so I created Zippy, and that turned into OSC. There's a little circuit board of the K-Bow, which is a Bluetooth violin bow. I figured I made the first violin, let's make the bow modern as well. There's some broadcast processors over on the right, which I designed about 20 years ago and are in every radio and TV station. And at the bottom, the Echoplex Digital Pro, a remake on the much-loved tape-based Echo device that's been around for a long time, and for many decades, everyone's favorite looper. So excuse me if I repeat myself. What is the most important technology of the 21st century? I'm sure we all know the answer, and I think the future will just continue to reinforce that fact. It's networking. And I'm very interested in what happens when you can network musicians live on stage. I'm a real fan of Western art music, classical music, modern music, and it's been really stuck. There's been really nothing new to explore since Bartók. He got every noise you could get out of a violin, and composers are really limited. And I think the rift between technical music, computers, etc., and classical music has never been greater. In the 60s and 70s, there was some exciting occurrences, but technology undid itself. It changed so rapidly that any good composer could not afford to spend multiple months, years writing a piece that would likely be played once and could never be played again because the technology kept changing underfoot. So I'm very committed to making this a better universe for modern composers. I'm going to show you a few examples. I was able to take a few years off starting in 2005 and refined some ideas I'd been working on and put together a little group called TrioMetrik. And TrioMetrik is unique in that the instruments all joined in a network where there was a master computer that would run the score. The instruments could modify each other in their sound. They could modify the score could modify them. It was really something unique. And I have a few examples, and it's almost 10 years to the day that we played our first performance. And when your instrument can change its very nature and how it sounds, and how, based upon how the violinist plays, you listen. You won't listen like you're at an ATM and someone's holding a gun to your head. It's like serious. So I have a few examples. This first example has Marielle playing a Zeta violin, and the score is modifying the sound, and she's able to modify the sound herself. So let's see if this works. We controlled video as well. So that's a live performance where the timbre of the instrument was controlled by both the score and the musician. I do think that networking technology it's already made an enormous impact on all of us personally, and I do believe it's an area of exploration for future musicians. And I think that being able to capture all of the basic elements of what a performance consists of, how you play, your interpretation, all of this can be quantified and controlled inside a master computer. I've written this huge program called Maps, and contains also, where's my mouse? There's like a musician screen. So you actually still have sheet music, but you also get warnings that you're about to be sampled, or countdown that the timbre of your instrument's going to change, or indicators about who's going to be controlling who. And we've had various composers write for us, and other than the fact that the equipment 10 years ago filled 8 racks of gear plus 4 racks of backup gear, it was a lot of fun. The only people making money were the airlines and chiropractors. But that is what prompted me to start KMI. So we'll do another little piece here. So this piece exploited some basic and wonderfully simple concepts. I could grab samples of the instruments played by Marielle Jacobson on violin, Ashley Adams on upright. and manipulate them from the guitar. And then at the end, I was just, from the guitar, controlling the rate of vibrato of the instruments based upon where I was on the fingerboard. And remarkably simple and understandable, but it imbues a power and an immediacy to electronic music, which I think is very desirable. QuNeos Quartet, bless them, continue to be a force of nature in terms of having new pieces commissioned on a regular basis. I think they've been responsible for more new music than like the next 5 foundations, NEA, etc., combined. Just remarkably talented and flexible musicians, and they commissioned a piece for the 4 K-bows, the sensor bows, where the bows controlled various parts of the piece. The length of the bow could control the timbre of the sound. They could scrub through a file. All kinds of really wonderful intimacy between live musicians, their gestures, and what the audience would hear. And I'm really committed to, I think a lot of people would understand this, keeping everything we've had. Musicians are pack rats. We don't like to give up things. I have an old clay drum I've had since high school. And so we need and want to move forward, but there's no reason to put the 10,000 hours of expertise we've invested in a particular instrument and style and move on to something else. So they really have personified this, and they're just fantastic. This is a piece written by Jay Cloyt, part of the MAPS system. MAPS is the name for a composition system that one of the things about modern electronic music is persistence. If someone writes a piece and it can only be played once and then all you have is a recording, it's unexciting. And some of our greatest composers, Terry Riley, John Adams, Gheorghe Ligeti, experimented but just were not interested in doing something that couldn't be played 5 years, 50 years, 100 years in the future. That's how composers think. And there's no reason they should be forced to not explore electronic music because of this impermanence. So MAPS is a system where you download compositional tools, you create your piece, you upload it. I started something called the Beam Foundation, a nonprofit foundation dedicated to this advancement. And the Beam Foundation would then maintain the piece so that X years in the future, a string quartet can download it, and everything you need would be there, all the signal processing, synthesis. I can open a Word doc from 20 years ago. I can open websites from, who knows, 20, 30 years ago. There is no technical reason why you cannot create a modern piece of electronic music that isn't playable in the future. So this is a piece by Jay Cloyt. There's a score follower, it tracks our phrases, grabs the last note of a phrase, and does this neat descending thing. It's really a lot of fun. great believer that if the musician dies on stage, all the music should stop within 30 seconds. And I think it really keeps your attention. Ashley her performance would select the various rhythmic sections that were played, and as mentioned earlier, the score follower would grab the last notes of a particular phrase and produce this drooping effect, and everyone had a good time and no one was hurt. Technology is what makes music happen. Other than vocal music and simple percussion instruments, we've always had technology defining what it would be possible. And like in the 1600s, people knew how to work metals and could build larger systems, and we had harpsichords and church organs. They offered access to many, many notes at once, but there was no dynamics. So the type of music that created were fugues, counterpoint, where you would have multiple moving voices that would dance across each other, but primarily without much dynamics. Pianos, because of Ludwig's demands, became playable, and these were due to advances again in metallurgy and skills that were evolving at the time. In the 1800s, the modern symphonic orchestra pretty much was codified because you could build multiple instruments that would play in tune. We take this kind of for granted nowadays. Of course, if you have an analog synth, you don't take it for granted. But that was a big thing, to be able to get 100 musicians in one place and play in tune. It was spectacular. So we've had an enormous benefit culturally from this, and people writing music for symphonies. 1890s, a couple of new instruments from our country, banjo and saxophone, and jazz grew out of those instruments and continues to advance in certain areas, not much in popularity, unfortunately, but it's still dear to most of us. Electric guitar. Electric guitar was invented in 1932. It wasn't until the 60s that it became the electric guitar. It takes a while for a technology to find its footing and its applications. And, now, for the last 40 years, we've had computers and networks and synthesizers, and what new, unique music that will transcend the decades will come from it. We've enjoyed great advances in utility. Synthesizers have become a great convenience. We don't have to drag B3s and 9-foot Steinways around, and EDM has become a wonderful form of performance music, but isn't quite hummable after you leave, and isn't quite playable by other people. There's a lot of unique musicians who are doing incredible things with the technology. So I think we're going to see more advances and more integration with traditional techniques and with new technologies. I broadly categorize instruments into 3 categories. Ones that make sound, acoustic instruments like a violin or a clarinet. Ones that don't, controllers, which control synthesizers or processing, and they're wonderful in their own right. And the hardest thing to do is an instrument that satisfies both requirements. I've spent most of my adult life trying to make a guitar control a synthesizer in a satisfactory way, like to the point where you could give it to someone, they'd play for a few minutes and then say, okay, now turn the synth on, and they've been playing synthesizer. I finally accomplished this, and it's really delightful, and we'll show you some examples of this. Sensors. You don't get nothing without a sensor. You can't turn on a light, can't make a cell phone call, even traditional instruments, say a clarinet, the sensor is the reed. It senses the motion and shape of your mouth, and the keys change the pitches that you can make. So I have spent an enormous amount of time developing unique sensors and KMI has allowed me and forced me to develop fabric-based sensors, and you can see them. You'll see them in some of the upcoming examples. This is what, if any of you played the drum pad, the BopPad in the other room, this is what's in there. It's a piece of fabric with screen printed traces and various resistors and conductors, and it's remarkably good. I've developed 8 generations of new fabric sensors. This is an octave of the K-Board Pro, and if you look behind, there's fabric. So this fabric is it's responsive to physical pressure and changes. It can sense X and Y locations, Z forces. It can sense bend and twist. So this has brought me into another area of exploration. Apparently these technologies are quite useful elsewhere. No one else has figured it out. Don't tell them. But like, here's an insole that senses 20 positions on your feet. So starting, I spun out a company 2 years ago called Bebop Sensors, and it allows me to continue to afford to make musical instruments. So I want to show you a few of the things that this fabric can do. Smart fabric, it's talked about a lot, but apparently we're the only ones who really know how to make it. And here's some examples. Couldn't get volunteers for that one. So all the controls for a video game built into the silicon case. So there's some exciting new things ahead for us. And it is that very fabric that allows the K-Mix to work. Behind each of the faders and in the rotaries, a piece of sensor fabric exists. And QuNeo has it, all of our foot controllers have it. And because it is fabric, it's literally like standing on a sock, which socks are made to do. You can do whatever you want. And it's really hard to damage these sensors. Most sensors are fragile. Here's a whole family of sensors that can be used in an incredible quantity of places. That's virtually indestructible. And you've seen, if you've looked at our site, videos of us throwing products out the window, driving over them with trucks and cars. So as musicians, especially stage musicians, you cannot have something fail. You're on the moon, and equipment has to be reliable, and I think this form of sensor is the most reliable I've ever encountered. I made the first programmable mixer the world had in '84, licensed it to AKAI. It was an 8-channel mixer. Everything was programmable, EQ, etc. And that was, again, because it was part of my need to perform live electronic music on stage. I knew I couldn't rely on a sound man. I needed a mixer that could be controlled by computer. And the K-Mix is from that same desire to be able to have control over the blend of the sound of my trio, or integrating live sounds with acoustic sounds. So very excited that the K-Mix is finished and is released and shipping. It's the hardest thing I've ever done. And it took everyone at KMI to make this happen. had to be bus powered. It had to have the best sounding preamps. It had to be fully featured, everything and anything you'd want in a mixer. Had to be robust. You can pour beer on it and it'll keep working. Waste of beer, but so it is shipping, and we're really delighted. And there are a couple up here, some in the other room. So it accomplishes at least 3 tasks, which often are embodied in 3 different products. An actual programmable mixer. We have DSP for each of the channels, and you'll see some of that when Thavius presents. It's an audio interface. It is class compliant, so you can plug it into any Mac, and it'll just show up. iOS support is almost complete. The Android support is working. It's just very friendly. So far we haven't had to employ any drivers. Windows, of course, is another universe. And it's a control surface. It's fun to play with. And it does surround sound. These rotaries at the top, the 4 rotaries, which can be used for setting treble, bass, compression, ratios, etc. When you put the mixer in surround mode, up to 8.1 channel surround or 5.1, let's say you're making film music, and you need to localize something, well, it's really tricky. It's a lot of gear or a lot of tweaking with a mouse, and now you can actually do it live. Bass management is built in, so you can have subwoofers and you control where the LFE frequencies are. I can't say we thought of anything, but I can also not say I know of anything that isn't in the mixer that people want. It's the compilation of a lot of work from some of the most wonderful, smartest people I know over the last 2.5 years. Mic pre's are on par with anything out there. A good Neve 500 series mic pre draws 3,000 milliwatts. Ours are actually quieter, less distortion, and draw 30 milliwatts. To be bus powered, every microwatt had to earn its way in. And there aren't chips out there you can buy that just do that. So everything was designed from raw components. It was, I think I went through 2 or 3 techs before they went crazy to get this realized. They hate it Monday morning, so they always show up with something, some new spin on the preamp that they would get to prototype. But it works, and we're all just very delighted and proud. This is our little promo. Great job. Noah and Dustin put this together with help from other people in the company. It shows us off very nicely. I have no idea what this is. Oh, there we are. We put 4 of them together as an aggregate device in live, and they just work. So there's a 32-in mixer. We were just around one night, and Carson just started plugging them in. You know, once we had more than a couple, it was a logical thing to do, but he did it, and we got up to 4 before we kind of ran out of patience and tracks. I believe the theoretical limit is 7, but it's already very exciting that it just all went together and worked. Again, being class compliant and making an aggregate device in Apple OS just turned out to behave perfectly. BopPad. Already showed you the fabric sensor that's in there. And, you know, drums are pretty expressive. There are a lot of drummer jokes, well-deserved, but the instrument itself responds differently upon where you hit it. And it just seemed a shame that there were no really readily available, affordable, robust interfaces that allowed either a hand drummer or a drummer with sticks to be able to elicit subtle sounds from synthesizers. You know, soft synths, the synths that we can run on our iPad are just phenomenal. I mean, 29 bucks, 10 bucks, free is more processing power and more quality synthesis than we could ever have imagined 15, 20 years ago. And it's readily available to all of us on affordable devices. There just aren't any good input devices. If you're a musician who wants to do more than turn a sound on and turn it off, it's a real dearth of controllers. And the ones that are out there are very expensive and not necessarily immediately knowable. I'm really, really big on this, being able to take your talents from your years of study and practice and be able to transfer them pretty much immediately to a controller and a computer and a synthesizer. There's no reason we can't make synthetic sounds be as expressive as acoustic sounds. Here's a little example. Much easier to lug in and out than a drum kit, and hopefully with the right voicing and sound creation as expressive. StringPort too. This is a personal goal. Being a guitarist, I really wanted to control a synth, and at the university they had a nice audio department and electronic music department, and if you didn't play a keyboard, you really couldn't play pitches on a synth unless you were moving a joystick around, and I just felt that was wrong. I felt, you know, if you didn't use an instrument that could essentially be reduced to a bunch of doorbells, it was just missing a lot of quality musicians. And one of the big things is latency, so you need to know the pitch of the note, and historically controllers are slow and make mistakes. You pluck a note, it takes a couple of cycles for it to figure out what the pitch is, and by then you're kind of waiting for the next note. And being forced through MIDI, it essentially emulates a keyboard, and guitar players are used to making all kinds of noises with their instrument, as are violinists and cello players and other acoustic instrument players. So there had to be a trick. There had to be a way around this wall of science, and we figured this out. I started this about 25 years ago and finally got it working. I slip a little circuit board into the neck of a guitar. It attaches simply to each of the frets. It's a normal fret. Externally, it doesn't look any different. Most of the times, if you're playing an instrument, you put your finger down before you play the note. So this gives us an incredible head start. We know what we're looking for. We know what octave it's in. So then we can spend our processing power in understanding the timbre, how bright the note is, how much pick noise or bow noise there is. It passes the Turing test. We put it in the hands of a lot of guitar players who played it and then say, okay, turn the synth on. It's really very satisfying. So StringPort 2, much better than StringPort 1. Here's an example. This is just the frets. Next thing I had to have was infinite sustain. If you're a guitar player and you stand in front of an amp and that note keeps going, it is transformational. And you know, it wasn't until we had 100-watt amps and zero respect for our hearing that sustain was possible. And there have been attempts and successes. There's the EBO. Sustainiac will keep one string going, but I needed all 6. And I realized it all had to fit into the saddle piece. We had to pick up and drive the string from that point. And that evolved for me watching some kids doing jump rope. And just their hands move so little to keep that rope going. And it was clear to me that if I grabbed, Noah did that, great job. I don't know why he's hanging out at schoolyards anymore though. But if you can see the string at one end, the bridge end, you can pick up the signal and drive it. You only have to move it like a few hundred microns, like 1 or 2 tenths of a millimeter to keep it going, because that's where its termination is. So it draws very little power, and it's upgradable to Fender-style guitars, which represent about 2/3 of the instruments out there. So here's an example. And I couldn't avoid putting a tilt sensor in there. So when he tilts the guitar up, it drives it up at an octave higher. And come on, if you're a guitar player, you're just going to do that anyway. So it's really quite delightful to play, and hopefully will be appearing soon in guitars near you. K-Board Pro 4, back to the original demon itself, the keyboard. Best controller for original synthesizers, yet limited to the constraints of how hard you hit the key and how soon you let it go. It's kind of like a Stockholm syndrome. It's like you can only do these things. So it's how you bond with the keyboard, and there should be more expression. And this is what we do with K-Board. There are a lot of products out there now that are starting to recognize the multi-dimensional performance instruments. MPE is a movement within the MIDI organization to standardize these things, which is wonderful. Rolly has produced the C-Board and the Rise. They're great people. Some of them are hard to play, and I just felt, as I've repeated several times already, I made the looper, I'm going to keep saying it, you got to be able to approach these new things with old talents. So we made a keyboard, some of you have seen it already, that is pretty much approachable. If you've played piano, organ, or keyboard, you can walk up to it and start playing and it'll sound good. Here's an example. So we wanted to make sure you could play lounge music on it so you could make a living. And here's some pictures of some of the finest people I know. We're over the bridge in Berkeley, and our doors have been open about 8 years, and we've had the pleasure to attract some of the brightest, most dedicated and knowledgeable creative talent in the world. I've started multiple companies, worked with a lot of different groups, and the people we have at KMI is unique. It may possibly be a once in a decade occurrence, maybe more. People just love what they do because they have the same needs and desires as the rest of us, making new musical instruments that truly enable expression and beauty to occur through music. Very, very lucky to know these people. And that's our presentation. Thank you.